and welcome to the Monday, August 14th, 2023 Maplewood City Council meeting. I wanted to open up tonight with just a little reflection because it's been a couple weeks. Every once in a while in our council rotation, because we meet on the second and the fourth Monday of the month, once in a while we have 3 weeks in between, and so we actually haven't been together at all this month. We started off the month with our National Night Out, which I know was a very busy night. As a city, we had 60 different events that were happening in the city. I know I ran into our public safety officers and staff in different locations, and it was a great night. I will say that the rainstorm only slowed things down a bit. I know it caused me to be delayed at one of the locations for longer, and instead of the 8 locations I was planning on going to, I only made 6. But still, it was a great event, and I want to thank staff for all of their time and their dedication and being out there at National Night Out. I know that our residents were very impressed seeing city staff out there, talking with city staff, and it certainly was a lot of fun. It was a beautiful night. Sad to say that, folks, it is August now. We are we're halfway into August. And so we're meeting for our first time in this month. But anyway, the National Night Out event was a huge success. So thank you all for that. And I know council members, you had your own opportunities with National Night Out. And I hope you enjoyed it certainly as much as I did. So council members, let's start with our Pledge of Allegiance, if we will, please. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. City Clerk Sint, would you please do the roll call for us?
Councilmember Villavicencio.
Here.
Councilmember Cave.
Here.
Councilmember Juniman.
Here.
Councilmember Lee.
Present.
Mayor Abrams.
I'm here as well. Thank you very much. Council members, moving on to the approval of the agenda. Is there a motion?
I move approval.
Second.
Moved by Juniman, seconded by Cave, the motion to approve the agenda. In terms of further discussion, there are 2 things that I'd like to talk about. First, I'd like to propose removing G6. That is something I spoke with Chief Beardeman today. That is the Resource Officer Agreement. We've got some more work to take a look at that, and so I'd like to remove that from the agenda. And under council presentations, I would like to add a distinction that was received by Representative Leon Lilly as a legislator of distinction by the Minnesota League of Cities. So I'd like to add that. Is there any other discussion? Seeing none, then all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
The motion is approved for the agenda. Moving on to approval of minutes. First, we have the City Council workshop meeting minutes for July 24th. Is there a motion concerning that?
I move approval.
Second.
Moved by Juniman, seconded by Lee, the motion to approve the Monday, July 24th, 2023 City Council workshop minutes. In terms of discussion, council members, I'd like, a correction. Under new business, it indicates that the council reached consensus to have the moratorium be heard at the August 14th City Council meeting, which is tonight. The council really didn't reach consensus, as I recall in our discussion. We didn't take a formal vote. I think it would be more accurate to say that the council directed staff to have the moratorium be heard. But I believe that there was some discussion and we weren't all in agreement, so I would propose that that be changed. Is there any other discussion about the workshop minutes? Okay, then with that correction, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? The motion passes. Moving on to our city council meeting minutes for July 24th. Is there a motion?
So moved.
Second.
Moved by Lee, seconded by Juniman, the motion to approve the July 24th, 2023 city council meeting minutes. Is there any further discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? The motion passes. Moving our agenda to the council calendar update. City Manager Coleman, this is your agenda item.
Thank you, Mayor, members of the City Council. You did hear about the budget review outline earlier at the workshop, but we will be doing the budget workshop again on the 28th, and in addition to that, we will have a resident listening session, which we are inviting the public to come in and talk about their priorities or help us outline our priorities for the 2024 budget. And that's going to start at 6:30 p.m. on the 28th. On September 11th, we're going to have Ramsey County Emergency Operations Plan, and that'll be about a 15-minute presentation, and the rest of that workshop will be devoted to the 2024 budget review as well. And then, as Finance Director Rube mentioned, we will be looking for the 2024 preliminary levy approval on September 11th. In terms of council comments and things that staff are working on your behalf, I put on here the public comment phone line, which is operational, and I was looking for additional input. So what I wanted to do is let you know how we see that working, and then you can tell me if I'm on the right track or not. So actually, we got our first message today, and you were all copied on that it was later this afternoon. It has to do with this evening's public comment period. I don't know if all of you got to listen to that or not, but plan would be that when we get one of those phone calls, a message, those would be forwarded to all of us sitting up here, council and myself, and then if it's something that staff can address right away, I will let you all know that. I'll say we got a message, this is the content, and we are addressing it. And that'd primarily be code enforcement issues or a random question that we might get from a resident. If it's something that's more policy oriented, then I would bring that up at this workshop session, or under this council comments at our next meeting, or the next meeting after the message is received. Does that make sense for all of you? Does that work?
That's a great idea.
Okay.
I see a lot of nodding heads, so I think that that's a good way to approach it.
And we'll see how it goes.
Okay.
So, thank you
sounds
for
good.
your input on that. And then also, just to let you know that we are looking into, Director Love is working on some EAB options. I did share with you the grant funding information that was forwarded by our Representative Fisher. And Mr. Love is looking into how we might address that. And tonight you got a little peek about maybe using some money that we were using on EDA and maybe sliding that into EAB removal. And so that'll be one of the options we'll be talking about at a later meeting. But we are working on that on your behalf. And if there's anything else, I'd be happy to put it on the list.
Okay, council members, is there anything else you want to bring up at this point? Okay, I don't see any lights. Then moving on to council presentations then. I had one thing I wanted to bring up. I received a letter from the League of Minnesota Cities recognizing Representative Leon Lilly as a legislator of distinction for his work during the 2023 legislative session. And specifically, the letter indicates that Representative Lilly is the chair of the House Legacy Finance Committee, that he helped identify, assess, restore, protect, and monitor lakes and streams that failed to meet water quality concerns and priorities, and made sure that those were addressed in the final legacy legislative agreement. And the League was recognizing Representative Lilly for his work as the chair of the House Legacy Finance Committee. And so we want to congratulate Representative Lilly for doing such a great job for the residents of Maplewood. So thank you very much for that. And I will get a hold of Representative Lilly. I just got these letters today. So I will congratulate him and thank him for that work. Moving on to our consent agenda items, just a reminder that G6 has been removed. Is there a motion concerning our consent agenda. It would be consent agenda items G 1 through 5, and then 7 through 11.
I motion approval of consent agenda items G 1 through 5 and 7 through 11.
Second.
Moved by Cave, seconded by Lee. Consent agenda items G 1 through 5 and 7 through 11. 7 through 11, sorry about that. Is there any further discussion? Councilmember Juniman.
I would like to have number 7 highlighted, please.
Okay. Highlight number 7. Deputy Chief Duga, this is yours. What? Oh, Busak, I'm sorry. Sorry about that.
All right. In which,
I'm
do you
sorry,
have a question
it would be
regarding, or-
G7. This is the purchase of the mobile command vehicle. Do you want to explain?
Sure,
It's just highlighted, so if you want to just tell us about that?
sure. So following the civil unrest back in 2020, we identified a shortcoming that we had as a police department as far as not having a mobile command vehicle when we needed to respond to larger scenes, more chaotic scenes. We were running these scenes from the back of a squad car, a back of an unmarked vehicle, and we just found ourselves not having the necessary equipment, technology that was needed to control these scenes in a professional manner and at a level that is demanded by the citizens. So we began pursuing getting a mobile command vehicle so we could effectively respond to scenarios such as that. We also recognize that it's a large purchase and there should be other ways that it can be used. So we'll additionally use it as a community outreach tool, a crime scene processing tool, so that we can ensure that we have multiple uses for that vehicle.
Very good.
It's a good thing for everybody.
Yes, it will be there when we need it next, which is, I think, a really nice thing. Council members, we've had a motion concerning G 1 through 5 and 7 through 11. We've had a highlight. Let's go to a vote. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, the motion passes. Thank you very much. Moving on to public hearings. Tonight, we have the interim ordinance regarding cannabis businesses, and we're going to have a public hearing on that tonight. I wanted to kind of go over how we will be running this. First, our city attorney, Ron Beatty, will be giving the staff report, and we will be hearing from him. Then there will be council questions of Mr. Beatty, followed by the public hearing. I will open up the public hearing if there's anyone who would like to speak. City Clerk sent, there is a sign-up sheet in the back that people will need to sign up if they would like to speak during the public hearing. I'll open up the public hearing and give anyone who wants to speak. They will have 3 minutes to be able to speak. When we have exhausted everyone who wants to speak, then I will close the public hearing. And then at that time, council will have a discussion. And then we will be voting on, there's actually 2 different agenda items. The adopting an interim ordinance authorizing a study and imposing a moratorium on the operation of cannabis businesses, and then a motion to approve a resolution authorizing publication of the ordinance by title and summary. So that's kind of an outline on how this will work. So, Mr. Beatty, I'm going to turn it over to you for the staff report.
Madam Mayor and Council, this is a follow-up on what you will recall as a somewhat lengthy discussion that we had at the last meeting involving a number of aspects of the new legislation. Specifically tonight, what we're talking about is considering the adoption of a moratorium. As I mentioned last time, we now know that since August 1st, the use and possession of cannabis is legal, but the sale is not legal. The sale won't be legal until sellers are licensed. The state is going to take the primary responsibility for doing that, and there are a number of things that have to happen before they're in a position to be able to do that. A whole new department has been created. That's going to have to be staffed. They're going to have to write regulations. They're mandated to adopt sample ordinances that can be shared with cities, and so we'll be looking forward to that. Even though the state is going to take the major role in that, there are limited ways in which cities can regulate the sale of cannabis. We can have zoning restrictions if we wish, allowing them in some districts and prohibiting them in others. We can establish setback requirements from certain uses. Within limits, we can establish a maximum number of licenses that will be allowed in the city. We can change or limit the length of the hours of operation. These are a number of the things that the city will be able to do if it chooses to do so. The ordinance or the statute anticipated that this is new territory for cities, and that a lot of things, as I've just described, will have to occur before licenses can be issued, and specifically authorize cities to impose a moratorium which can be in effect until January 1st, 2025. And so what you've got before you tonight is a draft moratorium which would establish a moratorium on the sale of cannabis in the city. Unlike most moratoria that we deal with, which prohibits something that would otherwise be allowed, such as a zoning use of some kind, sales are not going to be allowed anyway until the state is ready to issue licenses. The advantage, I think, of a moratorium, though, is because there are a number of things that the city has to consider in terms of potentially regulating the sales. My proposal to staff has been and will continue to be that we pay attention to the progress that's made by the state and consider what we might want to regulate, and not let this sleep until the state is ready to do something, but keep up with what's happening at the state and be prepared. But I think the advantage of a moratorium is to prevent us from getting caught short. In other words, the risk would be that the state would be ready to issue licenses and that we would not have put in place the ordinance amendments that we might want to enact, some of which might involve zoning, which of course has to go to the Planning Commission and is a longer process. So I think having a moratorium in place gives us some safety against that occurring. So what you've got before you tonight is a moratorium which is very similar to the moratorium that a number of cities have adopted and would keep the moratorium in place until January of 2025. But of course, like any moratorium, it could be repealed earlier than that if you so choose.
Thank you, Mr. Beatty. I appreciate that staff report. Council members, does anyone have any questions for Mr. Beatty? I know we had a pretty extensive discussion on this at our workshop, previous workshop about this. I see Councilmember Villavicencio, you have your light on.
Thank you. My question is under, in the moratorium, under exceptions, Article 6, it lists that lawful sale of edible cannabinoid products. And I'm wondering, would it make sense to add low potency hemp products in there too? Because since our previous moratorium is ending, I'm just wondering if we don't put that in there, does it ban those through this moratorium? Because it says you have edible cannabinoid products, but there are much more than just the edible ones that are potentially going to be sold.
Mr. Beatty.
The new edible is the term that was used in last year's legislation, as you know. The newer term is what was just mentioned. My understanding is that they are largely the same, but not identical. So I don't see why there would be a problem to use both terms in here, and I can certainly add that if that's the council's choice.
Excuse me, if I can say one more
Sure.
thing, Mayor. I guess, yeah, if we can do that, I would really appreciate it, just because I think edible cannabinoid products isn't expansive enough. It should include the low potency, because I know there's a lot of Maplewood tobacco stores that are already selling those products.
Well, yes.
And not all of them are edible.
Can
All
I
right.
just ask a question too, because I think we need some clarification on that? It was my understanding from the workshop that we had that the low potency products are going to be registered with the state by October 1st. Is that correct?
Yeah.
You know what, hold it. This is our opportunity for the council to speak. This isn't an opportunity for public hearing yet. So let's just wait for that. Mr. Beatty, I think we need some clarification.
Yes, well, the purpose of the moratorium is not to prohibit anything that can otherwise be sold currently. And yes, the council's decision last time was the do-nothing option, which is to let the moratorium, let last year's moratorium expire, and then let anything that can then be sold under last year's regulation to be sold. And so that's really the purpose of this. The purpose of this moratorium is only to deal with the products that are authorized under the new legislation and which cannot be sold until the state starts starts licensing them. What we talked about last time is that the state is also going to take over the licensing of edibles, now called low potency, when that eventually occurs. But the purpose of this is really to track current state law, which says that some things can be sold and some things cannot be sold.
So therefore, Mr. Beatty, do we need to modify this in any way to make that clear? Because we're not talking about the low potency.
I would think not, but
I would, right.
But if you look in the exceptions.
Okay, we'll see if we can kind of organize that. Mr. Beatty, do you want to try to clarify that for us?
Well, I'm not positive what the distinction is, so I'm really not able to say definitively whether that's a change that we want or not.
City Manager Coleman, what is your recollection of it?
Well, when I read the exceptions paragraph, it sounds like exactly what we want to do. We don't want to prohibit the sales of the low potency products that have been sold for this last year, but we do want to put a moratorium on the new cannabis products that are coming under this year's legislation. So I don't think we need to make any amendments. That's my read of that.
That was my understanding as well.
I think that that's correct, as I think about it. I think the language is correct in this draft.
So that the low potency, we decided last time to do nothing with.
Well, again, there's a large amount of overlap between what's going to be called low potency under the new bill and what we've been referring to as edibles. I'm not sure what the exact distinction is, but what we're really trying to deal with is the edible materials that were authorized last year, and we've decided to not take any action with regard to those, so that they're not caught up in this moratorium. So I think the language is correct as I think it through.
Okay. Councilmember Villavicencio, does that make sense?
It doesn't, but, because edible cannabinoids does not encompass all of the low potency. And if you look in the original statute and the current law, it explicitly calls them low potency. Because edible is just something you can eat, right? But there's other products other than just edibles.
Right, but I think what Mr. Beatty is saying is in reference to the Minnesota statutes, the sections that are listed here, I think that that makes the distinction between what was that first round of what I view as
Yeah.
low-potency edibles, as opposed to the current new legislation concerning, that was much broader in terms of legalizing marijuana.
The
That
defi-
started August 1st, because we're talking about the August
Right.
1st
Right.
start, not,
The reference in the ordinance that you see is Minnesota statute section 151.72. That's last year's legislation, and that's what uses the term edible cannabinoid products.
Okay. And so do we need to do anything from a legal standpoint?
No, I think that this is correct language.
If I could just get one more clarification. So, I guess what I want to know, if we can't add low potency in there, is not adding low potency, will it ban it after the moratorium that will end at the end of this month? Will it ban that if we do not add it to the exceptions?
No, I don't think it will have any effect on that.
Okay.
If whatever is covered under the edible language from last year's statute will not be affected by this. Anything that is covered under the new legislation will be banned or will be temporarily prohibited until it can be licensed by the state.
Okay, thank you for that clarification. Council, any other questions? Councilmember Lee.
Thank you, Mayor. I don't know if this is the right spot for this or not, but as I read through this and did a little bit more digging into it, the whole taking it to 2025, what I want us to do as a city is to be very proactive about this. I think this is a product that's not going to go away. And my piece of it is I want us to be proactive about it. And I see the study authorized here, which authorizes the city manager, the city staff to do some work in the process. Would it be, what I'm interested in doing is seeing if we can add in here some languaging to get a report on a quarterly basis so we can understand what is the state doing, what are we doing as a city, and being proactive about that process. Because I think with the moratorium last time, what I kind of noticed was I feel like we sat on it and nothing happened, nothing came out of it. So I think having that in here would be very helpful. The other piece is then to 2025 is one of my concern is I'm interested in having it being a year long versus having it going to 2025. And my reason for that is, this is something that we want to make accessible to the folks, to the community. And so I think having it being a year into it, my piece of it is I want to understand as a city how we can support businesses from a registration perspective as soon as we possibly can. And then at the same time, really understanding where these businesses are happening. So registering and so my hope and my understanding in the work that I've done and the people that I've spoken to is that the work will be done within a year's time frame. So I think pushing it out to 2025 will really prolong those opportunities for folks to get access for business and entrepreneurs to jump onto this.
okay.
A couple of comments. Well, what I heard you say is that you'd like to talk about having quarterly reports from staff. I agree with you on that. I think that I'm not even sure that quarterly reports are enough. I think that maybe every other month, some kind of report on what's happening, what are we doing.
And what
so
the
that-
state's doing.
So that what the state's doing, so that we can stay on top of it. But I would not, we don't need to add that to an actual ordinance.
Okay.
That's something that we can simply ask staff to do, is to give us reports.
Okay.
In terms of the moratorium, I believe the January 1st, 2025 date actually comes from the state statute. And I don't really want to change that. I like the idea of having the January 1st, 2025 date, because if we do a year and the state isn't ready, then we have to do something else. So I think that if we have the moratorium, we can always, depending on the state, we can always repeal the moratorium when we're all ready with what we're going to do in terms of regulation. But I don't want to force us that we have to keep tabs on that and that we would have to actually extend it. I think that that just gives more work to staff. But we can always, depending on the state, I just don't want us to be, I like the idea that January 1st, 2025 is in the statute. That's the maximum. We're going to go with that, but we can always pull it back depending on where the state is. I want to hear what other council members think. So I see Councilmember Cave.
Just the comments, Chambry, I like both of your ideas, with the reports. I like the fact that we're doing them sooner, like every other month, because I do want to know what the state is doing, and we need to be up on that. And if we're up on that, I think going to the 2025, I'm fine with that because, like you said, we can repeal it. So that's what I was going to say. It's kind of like an umbrella to cover that length of time, but we don't need to mandatorily keep it open then. If we're watching the state and they're ready to go, I'm ready to go when they are.
Yeah.
I mean, that's what I feel like. We're going to be ready to go when they are. So I don't want to have us take a year and a half to figure out what Maplewood's going to do.
No. Councilmember Juniman, what are your thoughts?
What she said. No, we keep it to January 1, 2025 because we can
Is
repeal
your
it.
microphone on? Okay.
Because we can repeal it. If we couldn't repeal it, that might be a different story, but
Okay.
since we can, there's nothing that says it'll stay in force once things are ready to roll, so.
Okay, because I think that that's important, that we are going to be prepared
Right.
to roll this out, and we will be staying up on what the state is doing, which I think is important. Councilmember Lee, does that satisfy your questions?
It does.
Okay.
So, I don't know.
Thank you for that. Any other questions from the council? Then with that, we are going to move to our public hearing. I'm going to open up the public hearing concerning the interim ordinance authorizing a study and imposing a moratorium. City Clerk Sint, we have some, two people who would like to speak. Susan Sint, you are our first person. The public hearing is open. Can you please identify yourself and your address, please?
Susan Sent.
Okay,
Yeah, 1445 Skilman Avenue East in Maplewood.
thank you. And you've got 3 minutes.
I don't get why there's a moratorium. What are you going to study? I don't get what you're doing. Okay, so people can't open a dispensary. Well, nobody's even got a license. I don't understand. What are you going to be studying? What are we?
City Manager Coleman.
Thank you, Mayor, members of the council. I believe that some of the things that I've heard from the council has to do with whether or not we want to have our own licensing process, if we want to restrict them to certain zoning districts, like we do liquor stores and grocery stores, other uses.
So you're waiting to see what the state does? Because the state already
No.
told you. Well, you said you
No.
were going to wait and see what the state's doing. We're going to get monthly reports on what the state's doing.
Were you going to use the state information to help us form our opinions and our approaches to how they're regulated?
Okay,
and
but
that could
first
be
this-
through
Can
zoning.
Can we just
Okay,
wait?
That could be through zoning or
I only
through
get 3
licensing.
minutes, so I'm trying
Right.
to get my time in.
Well, we won't start the clock till, we'll start over, but we're going to be looking at what other cities are doing, so we're going to study it. And it also has to go to the Planning Commission and our other advisory boards to get their input on it. So we're using the 1 year to evaluate what we think is best for the community or what the
I'm
council
trying to
thinks.
figure out what your concerns are. What do you mean best for the community? You're trying to figure out how to limit access to people, or?
Decide the number of facilities we want in the community and where they should be located are two ideas.
Yeah, I'm just confused because I believe that prohibition is deadlier and more dangerous than anything you can prohibit. And the state finally, ended this prohibition, and now you guys are just extending it. So I'm trying to figure out why, because my understanding is first they have to form the Office of Cannabis Management. Then they have to create the licensing process.
Yeah.
Then you have to apply and actually get the application. Then you have to actually license and get the license. Now we're almost a year down the road. Now you can put a plant in the ground. So why do you think that there's going to be a dispensary before January 2025? They already have it set up, so no one's going to be able to open a dispensary. Right now, the Native Americans on the reservations can sell cannabis. Well, there's no reservation here, so you don't have to worry about anybody selling cannabis here in Maplewood. And then the medical dispensaries are going to be able to get a combination license, and as soon as they get it approved, they're going to be able to sell cannabis because they're already growing it. So you don't have to worry about them selling marijuana in Maplewood. I mean, I don't understand what you're worried about.
I don't think anyone here is worried.
Well,
No,
you seem
let's do
worried. You're
this.
putting a
This is a public
moratorium on
hearing.
it. I'd be worried about all the booze that's being sold in this
Okay,
town.
can I kind of organize this a little bit? The way we normally run a public hearing is that we give you 3 minutes to hear your opinion and to ask
My
whatever.
opinion is
just wait one-
prohibition is
just
deadlier
wait-
than the things you're prohibiting.
Just wait a minute, we're not, okay. We give you 3 minutes, we want to hear your opinion, and then what we normally do is we don't respond while you're up here. We listen to everybody, we conclude the public hearing, we give everyone an opportunity to share their opinion, and then the council will discuss, and to the extent that you have asked questions, we will respond to those questions afterwards. But I want to make sure that you get your full 3 minutes so that we understand what your opinion is. So council, let's give her an opportunity, and then we'll respond to your comments and concerns once we're done with the public hearing.
Prohibition is deadlier than anything you prohibit, okay? And I'm an adult. I can make my own decisions. I would appreciate it if you just, follow the state and end 80 years of prohibition. Maybe you should focus your priorities on all the alcohol that's available in town. That's all I'm saying.
Okay. Thank you very much, Ms. Sint. Next, we have Daryl Paulson. Can we get you up to the microphone so that we can have it on the recording?
Bring up the jar of marijuana here for them, just the jar, so they can see it and pass it around. This is marijuana that was given to me since August 1st. I can get jars of marijuana all day long like this for no reason, just because I've been an activist for 37 years. Okay, my thing is what I'm trying to say is there are already people in town that are doing business in town and doing a good deal of business around cannabis and cannabis products. What I'm suggesting is just like if Baby's answers are right and he says that the state's gonna require you to license and be licensed by October for mobile level gummies, why is it's irresponsible for us as a city not to look at this and say that this is happening and try to identify where it is happening so that we can look at those zones and see if we want that kind of behavior to continue happening there or if we want to change it or modify it in some way. But if you just wait for the state to do it in 18 months, you guys are going to lose out on a ton of revenue. You guys are going to lose out on a ton of money that you guys could have gotten around this issue. And the fact of the matter is, the reason you guys said you wouldn't do this to begin with was because there was no local government aid coming to the city to do enforcement or compliance. I spent the better part of 60 days in my legislative work making sure that you guys get local government aid in that bill. And that means that you guys are going to get 80 million. You guys are going to get $80 million in 24. You're going to get $80 million again in 25. 20% of that can be used for compliance or enforcement issues, whatever you want to use it for. But that is what we did when everybody was screaming, well, we only want to do this if we can have some local government control. And so that's what I did. I made sure that you guys had those dollars available to you. And we're not even going to be able to use those dollars because by the time our moratorium expires, those dollars are going to be ate up by some other city or some other organization. And then you're going to say, where's our local government aid, Daryl, that you promised us? Pretty much, I would say it is not time to do a moratorium. It is time for you guys to get off your asses and do something about cannabis so that my kid doesn't have to go to school and be faced with using vapes that she doesn't know nothing feel all. And come to find out that it was another kid that brought it to school. So it is your responsibility to protect me and my family in that regard. So please, let's do something. I spoke to a couple people, couple council members today, and one member said, I don't want the kids getting that. One member said, I'm not for a moratorium. So let's figure out what we can do. Cannabis is here. Cannabis is not going away. The products that I have in that case right there, can you bring up this case? These are all products that I'm zipping. I'm here to show it to the mayor so she can see it.
I saw it. Thank you very much.
So all these products are bought, sold, or given to me, or I use in the city of Maplewood. Okay, that's about $500 worth of medicine that I carry around every day. I take it to the airport with me every 2 months, run through the airport with it, just to piss off the people at the airport. Okay? So those are legitimate things, and I'm telling you, there's people that are doing business and having events in Maplewood that are making a lot of money off this issue. And you guys have every right to try to regulate it and figure out where it is and what they're doing. Okay? If you guys don't want to make any money off this, so be it. There's a lot of cities that don't want to make any money off it. But let's do it smart. Okay? Let's not wait for a year or two for us to be behind the eight ball.
Thank you for your input. We appreciate it. Is there anyone else who would like to have any input concerning this particular topic during the public hearing? Anyone else who would like to speak? Is there anyone else who would like to speak on this issue? Okay, then I will close the public hearing, and this is our opportunity to respond and to ask staff for their response as well. I think what I'll do is maybe start off with, just so that it's clear, the state law is very clear. I don't think anything that we're talking about is a prohibition. This is new territory for a city, and this is one of those things that the bill itself is 321 pages long. And so trying to absorb all of that, some of the things that I've heard discussed by Mr. Beatty tonight, we're talking about how implementation will work in terms of compliance and training. Zoning, there are zoning issues that we need to concern ourselves with. Setbacks were brought up, I believe, by Mr. Beatty. The maximum number of licenses that can be permitted in our state is something we as a council have to discuss. The hours of operation. There are just so many unknowns that we want to make sure that we implement this correctly for our community, and we want to do it right. And so those are my thoughts in terms of some of the questions that were brought up about what we're doing. Sales can't happen until the state licenses, and the state isn't prepared to license yet. So if there are any sales that are going on, then that, I believe, is a law enforcement issue. It's not something, I mean, I certainly don't want kids to have access to this. If there is a sale going on, the state hasn't licensed this yet. And so that is a compliance issue, that's a law enforcement issue, but that's not what we're talking about here as a council. We're trying to figure out the implementation and how we do that in the best possible way. Councilmember Cave, I know you had some thoughts, your light's on.
I did. I guess you really did just cover everything I wanted to talk about. So if I'm going to repeat it, you know, this isn't prohibition. We can't regulate. Sales are illegal to sell it, and we can't. I just think there's a lot of confusion out there because, you know, the moratorium's not on whether or not we can sell it or not in Maplewood. I mean, I think everyone in here is, you know, we've never discussed that we're not in favor of it. We're waiting for the state, but we don't want the state to come back in 2 weeks and say, whoa, we're handing out licensing. I mean, they can do it whenever they want to, and if we're not prepared to say, hey, that's not, we don't want it here, or maybe we want it everywhere in Maplewood. That's just a conversation that needs to be had.
Excuse me, this is
Okay.
not the public hearing, this is a council discussion. You're out of order. Councilmember Cave, is there anything else that you would like to
No,
add?
no, I'm good.
Okay, Councilmember Villavicencio.
The law dictates where they,
Councilmember Villavicencio, you have the opportunity to speak.
Thank you. I guess what I was gonna say was, a little bit on the, comments of what Councilmember Lee, was talking about in, I don't think it's necessary. I agree with him on, shortening the moratorium if possible. But one other option that I thought, could be a good avenue for the shape of, because, okay, so when I look at this issue, I think, yes, we want to wait for the state because there's a lot of regulations that have to come down, right? But we have an opportunity to create it the way Maplewood wants to have it, right? And so I think the idea is how could we do it proactively as much as possible? And so, and so what I'm thinking is one thing is, could maybe the MAC be a group of folks that are Maplewood residents who could advise some of the recommendations of how Maplewood would want our ordinances to look like.
Thank you for that. Council members, any other thoughts? Councilmember Juniman.
I agree with what Rebecca said and what you did a very good job at the beginning. It's like, we're not trying to stop anything. We're trying to put it in order to how we want it done in this community once the state licenses it. And in the meantime, nobody can be selling it here legally. So that's, as you said, an enforcement issue. It's not anything we can legislate, period. It's totally up to the state. But I do think we want a fashion where we wait.
This is not an opportunity to hear anything. This is a council discussion, ma'am. Councilmember Juniman, go ahead.
Makes sense.
Councilmember Juniman.
I appreciate your time. It's kind of silly wasting our time as Maplewood residents.
It's just a way for us to put in place the way we want it to look once people are licensed by the state. It's nothing more than that. And because it's something we can repeal, it will not go on longer than the licensing comes to be. It has nothing to do with stopping something that is going to happen once the state gets its act together and gets everything in place. But we need something in place now so that we can make it look like we need it to look. I don't think it's anything more complicated than that. If it is, somebody needs to explain it to me, because I don't think it is.
Thank you. I might say as well that, certainly Mr. Beatty has outlined some of the potential ordinances that we will be looking at, and before any ordinances are adopted, Mr. Beatty, can you kind of outline, because there's public comment and opportunity for ordinance changes, that can you kind of outline that process? We were having a public hearing tonight anyway. So any ordinance change that we make, we're going to encourage, we will have public comment opportunities. Mr. Beatty, do you want to kind of
Yes.
talk to that?
Yes, Mayor and Council. We don't know exactly what ordinances the council may decide to implement. If it is a zoning ordinance, and I suspect that there will probably be a zoning aspect to this, that is a lengthy process which has to go through Planning Commission and be subject to public hearings. Even if it's, to the extent that it's not a zoning ordinance, as we know, we post ordinances 10 days in advance by statute and allow people to read those ordinances in advance, and that gives people an opportunity to comment about them. So there is potentially a long process to go through. I think this is something staff will work on. I think we're all saying the same thing. We don't want to ignore this. We don't want to adopt the moratorium and then ignore this for another year. I think we want to keep track, and I think the council's interest in getting regular reports is a good idea. I agree with the city manager. I don't think that's necessary to put in the ordinance. That's simply a direction to staff to bring back regular reports so you know what's happening. We'll see what those sample ordinances from the state tell us. We'll see what the regulations are. There's going to be another legislative session between now and then. Who knows what changes might occur in the statute at that time. I mean, I think there's a lot of stuff that could occur. And the study that we will be conducting and are required to conduct in order to put a moratorium in place is to evaluate all of that is occurring and have it reflect on how we want that to be implemented in Maplewood. And it may well be that we bring ideas, the staff bring ideas back to the council periodically to run them up the flagpole and see what people's idea is, with the idea that we have a comprehensive set of ordinances ready to go when the state is ready to license. And I agree entirely. If that occurs prior to January 1st, 2025, and I've heard reports saying it may or it may not, but if it does, then the goal would be to have the city's ordinances dovetailing that, and the council could then repeal the moratorium in advance of that date.
Thank you very much. Councilmember Lee.
Thank you, Mayor. With the possibility of being able to repeal the moratorium, I am comfortable with it then. So my piece is just I want to make sure we're doing something. I just don't want to sit idle on this piece and come January 2025 and we don't have anything at all. That's just my biggest piece. So I think the report will be greatly appreciated, City Manager. So thank you for offering that every other month.
Thank you. Council members, I don't see any other lights on. We have two motions before us. Would someone like to make the first motion?
Sure, I will motion to adopt an interim ordinance authorizing a study and imposing a moratorium on the operation of cannabis businesses.
Second.
Moved by Cave, seconded by Juniman, the motion to adopt an interim ordinance authorizing a study and imposing a moratorium on the operation of cannabis businesses. Is there any further discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed?
Nay.
Okay. The next motion, would someone like to make that one?
I motion to approve the resolution authorizing publication of the ordinance by title and summary.
Second.
Moved by Cave, seconded by Juniman, the motion to approve the resolution authorizing publication of the ordinance by title and summary. Is there any further discussion? Hearing none, then all those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed? Okay, that was unanimous. Thank you, council members. And, this is like Mr. Beatty stated, this is new territory. And I think the one thing that I hear from the council is that we want to do this right. We want to be prepared, we want to be well informed, and we want to be kept up to date. And I didn't think about the fact that the legislature will be meeting again in between, and there may be further changes, which we will have to then adopt and review those. So this is something that we're going to be working on for a little bit. But I think the common goal that I hear from everyone is that we want to do this right for our community. So with that, council members, we have finished our agenda. We have no unfinished business, no new business, no award of bids. And so with that, we are adjourned. Good work tonight, everyone. Thank you so much.